When firebrand Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte swept to power in 2016, he promised an overhaul of the country's foreign policy. For Duterte, that meant shaking off its former colonizer and longtime military ally in Washington, and shaking hands with Beijing, despite a China-skeptic Philippine public.
The way he sold it to the broader public, who is pro-American and anti-China, was twofold. One, this would be a better way to secure Philippine interests in the South China Sea, and two, China would give him a lot of money for it, and neither of those things happened.
6 years on, China has surpassed Japan as the Philippines' biggest trading partner and is by far Manila's largest source of imported goods. But rosy economic figures belie Filipinos' simmering frustration toward China. Billion-dollar infrastructure projects promised by Beijing when Duterte came into power haven't materialized, and an influx of Chinese business people have priced locals out of the property market.
The Philippines didn't really get much from China in terms of the concessions that the administration is expecting, especially given that the Philippines took a position that ultimately, I would say, sacrificed its national interest.
All that poses a problem for the man currently bidding to be Duterte's successor, the namesake son of the former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Duterte's party has backed Marcos Jr. in the upcoming election. His daughter Sara is Marcos's running mate for vice president. And that association has left some fearful Marcos too will be soft on China.
I think Marcos would even double down on establishing partnerships with China, at least at the economic realm, and would try to shelve the West Philippine Sea dispute as much as they can. Again, at the expense of what the Philippines won in 2016.
2016 was a watershed moment for the two sides. That year, The Hague rules China's claim to waters within this so-called 9-dash line had no legal basis. Beijing lays claim to 2/3 of the South China Sea, through which 60% of global maritime trade passes. Filipinos now call this the West Philippine Sea. China rejected The Hague's decision, and since then, so-called Chinese maritime militia have hounded Philippine fishing boats in disputed waters. Anti-China protests are held on the anniversary of The Hague's ruling.
Dapat gawa ng aksyon na para implement yung ating pagkapanalo o mapatupad yung pagkapanalo natin sa arbitral tribunal.
Analysts say Beijing's intransigence on the issue has deeply damaged its reputation.
The fact that China seems incapable of changing its behavior or unwilling or uninterested in changing its behavior, I think suggests to many Filipinos that China doesn't take the Philippines seriously, doesn't treat the Philippines as a co-equal state in the international system.
With just days till the election, Marcos Jr. is polling far ahead. That's despite strong grassroots support for leader of the opposition and current Vice President Leni Robredo, a human rights lawyer who's seen as having a tougher stance on China.
She was very firm and clear in asserting what has been achieved or won in the 2016 PCA ruling. And she is very firm in upholding that particular document when it comes to jumpstarting any type of conversation when it comes to our territories in the West Philippine Sea.
Regardless of the candidate's position on maritime disputes with China, the winner of the May 9th election will need to balance between the country's largest trading partner in Beijing and traditional security ally in Washington. A dilemma increasingly faced by leaders across the region. Alex Chen and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.